It was a quiet Tuesday morning in Washington, D.C., but not for long. A headline had just erupted across every major media outlet: Pam Bondi to testify before Congress over alleged political prosecutions in Fulton County. The name Fani Willis suddenly became the hottest topic across America once again, only this time she was on defense. Fani Willis, the embattled district attorney of Fulton County, had made a name for herself over the past couple of years. Ambitious, bold, and unapologetically progressive, she had pursued high-profile cases with a tenacity that both inspired her supporters and infuriated her critics. But her decision to bring unprecedented charges against high-ranking Republican figures, including individuals closely tied to President Donald Trump, had set off a firestorm. And now that storm was heading directly for her. At the center of it all stood Pam Bondi, the sharp, relentless U.S. Attorney General under President Trump. She had been quietly gathering information behind the scenes for months: phone records, emails, financial statements, internal communications. Her target wasn't just Fani Willis, it was what Bondi called a widespread abuse of prosecutorial power cloaked as justice. What triggered the showdown was a secret memo uncovered by a whistleblower within the Fulton County DA's office. The memo, reportedly authored by a senior staffer, outlined preferred media targets, narrative spin cycles, and timed leaks to damage Republican campaigns. The memo didn't name names, but it didn't have to. The implication was damning. Pam Bondi, never one to tiptoe, took the memo straight to Congress. In a thunderous hearing before the House Oversight Committee, she dropped the bombshell. What we are witnessing is not justice. It's not accountability. It's lawfare, and it's being weaponized to destroy political opponents. The hearing room went silent. Flanked by mountains of evidence and a team of ironclad federal prosecutors, Bondi laid out what she called a blueprint of corruption. She painted a chilling picture of coordinated efforts between partisan prosecutors, political operatives, and even members of the media to manufacture charges, leak partial truths, and conduct trials not in courtrooms but on Twitter. But it wasn't just talk. Bondi had receipts. Screenshots of Slack messages between Fani Willis's team mocking defendants, financial records showing unusual campaign donations shortly after indictments, and even internal discussions about timing legal actions for maximum media exposure. By the end of the hearing, Democrats were shaken. Republicans were galvanized. Independents were stunned. But the biggest reaction came from Fani Willis herself. In a defiant press conference the following day in Atlanta, she stood at the podium flanked by her legal advisors. "This is nothing more than political theater," she snapped, her voice trembling with fury. "I will not be intimidated. I will not be silenced." But her confidence masked growing cracks beneath the surface. Privately, sources revealed that panic had set in among her staff. Multiple team members had already lawyered up. Rumors swirled that some were cooperating with federal investigators. And Bondi? She wasn't done. "This isn't about politics," she said in a fiery interview on Fox News. "It's about protecting the Constitution. If they can do this to a president, they can do it to you." By the end of the week, the Department of Justice, under Bondi's leadership, launched an official inquiry into potential abuse of prosecutorial discretion in Fulton County. The dominoes were starting to fall. And Pam Bondi was just getting started. As the weekend approached, the nation held its breath. The drama between Pam Bondi and Fani Willis had exploded from Washington corridors into everyday conversations at diners, barbershops, and gas stations across America. Cable news ran 24/7 panels. Social media platforms were ablaze with hashtags like #BondiBombshell and #FaniExposed. What had started as a legal inquiry was now morphing into a full-blown national reckoning. But the tipping point came on a rainy Friday afternoon, when the whistleblower came forward. His name was Daniel Reese, a mid-level legal analyst inside the Fulton County DA's office. Soft-spoken and meticulous, Reese had worked closely with senior prosecutors under Fani Willis. When he sat down for a live televised interview with investigative journalist Cheryl Hartman, the country stopped what it was doing. With a trembling voice and eyes heavy with guilt, Daniel told his story. "I joined the DA's office to serve justice," he began. "But what I witnessed wasn't justice at all. It was politics disguised as prosecution." Reese detailed a disturbing pattern of conduct. According to him, certain team members openly discussed how indictments against Republican figures could be strategically timed, to influence election cycles. He described meetings where aides bragged about receiving praise from top Democratic operatives for targeting the right people. But what stunned the nation the most was what Reese said next. There were instructions, he said, to avoid digging too deeply into cases involving Democratic donors or allies. But when it came to Trump associates, the gloves came off. He provided screenshots of internal messages discussing PR angles for high-profile charges. There were mentions of favorable outlets that would echo our narrative. Some of the most damning lines even suggested pushing charges, regardless of legal strength, just to make headlines. Reese paused, then said with visible sorrow, "We weren't prosecuting crimes, we were prosecuting people." Within hours of the interview airing, Pam Bondi held an emergency press conference. With her signature calm authority, she looked directly into the cameras and announced, "We are elevating this to a federal criminal investigation into potential civil rights violations, prosecutorial abuse, and election interference." She went further, declaring that subpoenas would be issued to multiple Fulton County officials and external political consultants. Cell phones, emails, and financial records were being seized under warrant. Fani Willis's office? Dead silent. Behind closed doors, chaos erupted. Several senior staffers called in sick or resigned altogether. Internal legal counsel reportedly advised Fani to prepare for a possible grand jury subpoena. Meanwhile, Bondi's office released a staggering 89-page preliminary report. It included documentation of campaign donations flowing into PACs connected to Willis shortly after controversial indictments, internal memos questioning the legality of certain charges which were allegedly ignored, evidence of ex parte communication with media before key charges were made public. The American people were stunned. Even some moderate Democrats began voicing concern. Former prosecutors and legal scholars appeared on television saying the optics were damning and the facts, if proven true, could destroy public trust in the justice system. On Capitol Hill, Republican lawmakers introduced a resolution calling for Fani Willis to step down pending investigation into ethical and legal misconduct. Pam Bondi, now hailed as a legal warrior by her supporters, didn't back down. "We don't destroy our political opponents in courtrooms," she said on national television. "We defeat them at the ballot box." What happened in Fulton County is an affront to the very principles this nation was built on. As pressure mounted, Fani Willis was forced to go on the defensive. In a hastily scheduled press briefing, she appeared uncharacteristically shaken. "This is a smear campaign," she insisted, "orchestrated by people who want to see me silenced." But for many watching, her words rang hollow. Her hands shook. Her voice faltered. And across the country, Americans, no matter their politics, began asking the same question. What if Pam Bondi was right all along? Just when the dust seemed ready to settle, Pam Bondi did something that shook the very foundations of Georgia's legal system. She convened a federal grand jury. The location? A secure courtroom in the Department of Justice headquarters in D.C. The mission? To determine whether Fani Willis and her associates had engaged in criminal abuse of power under the color of law. Within a week, key figures were subpoenaed. Investigators from the Office of the Inspector General swept through Fulton County with quiet urgency, interviewing staffers, reviewing digital communications, and tracing financial contributions that had mysteriously flowed into political action committees after each of Fani's headline-grabbing indictments. The biggest break came from a digital forensics team that had recovered deleted communications from office computers. What they found was explosive. There were emails between Fani and high-ranking Democrat operatives, discussing strategic indictments and political optics. Encrypted messages indicating an effort to cover their tracks. Drafted scripts for coordinated media talking points, already prepared before official charges were filed in certain cases. One document was labeled Phase 2, Indictments and Election Pressure, Q3 Rollout. That same document outlined a proposed timeline targeting Trump allies leading into the next election cycle, complete with potential fundraising projections, media strategy, and collaborative influencers. It read more like a campaign memo than a legal plan. When these findings were presented to the grand jury, sources inside said the mood turned grim. Legal analysts across the country began predicting serious consequences, charges of conspiracy, deprivation of rights under color of law, and possibly even racketeering. Meanwhile, Fani Willis's inner circle began to fracture. Her former deputy DA, Melissa Hargrave, struck a cooperation deal with Bondi's office. In return for immunity, Hargrave delivered over 200 pages of internal communications, including recordings of office discussions. One of those recordings would later go viral. "Look, this isn't about guilt or innocence," a voice said, allegedly Fani's. "It's about control. We need to keep Trump's people busy fighting in court so they can't campaign." The backlash was immediate and furious. President Trump addressed the nation from Mar-a-Lago, calling it the greatest abuse of prosecutorial power in American history. His approval ratings spiked overnight, particularly among independents and swing voters. Even longtime critics begrudgingly admitted this was different. Pam Bondi, speaking to a crowd in Tampa, was fiery and focused. "This isn't about Democrat or Republican. It's about freedom. It's about justice. And it's about asterisk stopping the rot before it infects every institution we hold dear." By now, even mainstream media outlets that had initially defended Fani began shifting their tone. Editorials cautiously admitted that if the allegations were true, they couldn't be ignored. The New York Times ran a headline that shocked the political establishment. "Did lawfare go too far? A reckoning for prosecutorial overreach." Meanwhile, inside Fulton County, protesters began gathering outside the courthouse, both for and against Fani Willis. Tensions escalated. Police were stationed around the clock. State lawmakers proposed emergency legislation to strip partisan prosecutors of certain unchecked powers. In the halls of power, the whispers grew louder. Resignation was on the table. But Fani refused. "They want me to quit?" she barked during a press scrum. "I'd rather be dragged out in handcuffs." That quote would come back to haunt her, because just days later the grand jury voted, and the results sent shockwaves through the nation. Pam Bondi, standing before a packed press room, made the announcement. "We are issuing federal indictments against Fulton County District Attorney Fani Willis for criminal abuse of office, conspiracy to deprive individuals of civil rights, and obstruction of justice." The room exploded in questions. Reporters jostled for position. Flashbulbs fired. Bondi continued without flinching. "Let this be a warning. If you try to use the law to silence political opponents, you will be held accountable. No one is above the Constitution." That night, America watched as federal agents escorted Fani Willis from her home in handcuffs. It was a scene few thought they'd ever witness. And yet, it was just the beginning of the reckoning. Fani Willis's mugshot was plastered across every major newspaper and website in America. Some saw it as justice finally catching up with a rogue official. Others claimed it was political theater. But one thing was certain: the trial was about to become the most watched legal showdown since Watergate. The courtroom buzzed with electricity as cameras rolled and reporters filed in daily. The American people were glued to their screens, treating the trial like a primetime drama. This wasn't just a legal battle. It was a symbolic war over truth, power, and the weaponization of justice. Pam Bondi, now at the center of it all, led the prosecution team personally. She opened with a sharp, commanding statement. "This case isn't about political affiliation. It's about betrayal. Betrayal of the law, of ethics, and of the American people." Bondi and her team laid out a devastating timeline. They showed how Fani Willis had allegedly worked hand-in-glove with DNC consultants and media figures to push a persecution campaign against Trump associates. The prosecution revealed detailed communications and financial trails, PAC donations that spiked right after key indictments, and contracts awarded to political allies for consulting and media work, all tied to the same lawfare initiative. The centerpiece of the trial came when Daniel Reese, the original whistleblower, took the stand. He recounted, under oath, how internal meetings included statements like, "We need to break Trump's network. The courtroom is our battlefield." He testified that staff were routinely pressured to bring charges with just enough teeth for headlines, even if the evidence was thin. "I was asked to bury exculpatory evidence," Reese said, voice trembling. "That's when I knew. I had to come forward." Pam Bondi gently but firmly walked the jury through document after document. Screenshots, memos, emails, audio recordings. Then came the Hargrave files, a cache of internal directives from Fani's former deputy, Melissa Hargrave, that detailed the play-by-play of what prosecutors called the weaponization of the Fulton County DA's office. One line from a memo stunned the courtroom. If we can't beat them at the ballot, we'll beat them with indictments. The defense team tried to pivot, claiming the entire investigation was politically motivated, a vendetta orchestrated by a Trump-led Justice Department. But that argument failed to stick. Because Bondi had one final card to play, she called Ethan Wells, a mid-level DNC contractor who had agreed to testify under immunity. Wells detailed how he had worked on messaging and media coordination for Fani Willis's office while being paid directly by a Democrat super PAC. His testimony was devastating. It was all about narrative control. We had folders labeled optics prep before charges were even finalized. As Wells spoke, gasps echoed in the courtroom. Outside, Americans across the political spectrum were forced to confront the ugly truth. This was no longer about guilt or innocence, it was about power. The jury deliberated for 3 days. When they returned, the courtroom fell silent. The foreman stood. On the charge of criminal abuse of power, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of conspiracy to deprive civil rights, guilty. On the charge of obstruction of justice, guilty. Fani Willis sat frozen. Her expression was blank, almost in disbelief. The courtroom erupted. Protesters outside clashed. Police rushed to maintain order. America, once again, was split down the middle, some cheering, some crying foul. But the law had spoken. Pam Bondi stood quietly as the verdicts were read. No gloating. No fist-pumping. Just a calm, resolute look on her face, the look of a woman who had seen corruption, taken it head-on, and won. In her post-trial remarks, she was brief. Let this verdict serve as a message. America is not a banana republic. Justice is not a tool of revenge. And prosecutors are not above the Constitution. Across the country, trust in institutions badly shaken over the past decade had a glimmer of hope restored. The media began to ask the hard questions they once ignored. Editorials that had once supported Willis now questioned how far others in power had gone. Investigations into similar behavior in other states were quietly launched. It was a reckoning. And it was far from over. In the weeks following the verdict, the nation went through a whirlwind of reckoning. Fani Willis, once seen as a rising Democratic star, now sat in a federal prison cell awaiting sentencing. Her fall from grace wasn't just political, it was cultural. The headlines that once lionized her turned to scathing critiques. Talk show hosts,